Okay, hi everybody. Good night. Good night. Good evening. My name is Joe Sackman. I'm with the Executive Committee of New York Progressive Action Network. We are a progressive, as it says in our name, organization that is basically uplifting the work of different progressives issues and trying to provide as much information, content, and education as possible. And that's what tonight is about, providing education around basically our taxes here in New York and what we're doing to reform this very regressive tax system that where we could say the ultra wealthy don't pay their fair share. And tonight with me is Erica Vladimir. She is the communications director for the Invest Our New York campaign, and she's going to introduce some of us, and some of us are already familiar with the Invest Our New York pieces of legislation that are going to help us achieve the goals of raising public, public money for public good, right? So this is some very interesting stuff. You know, people don't like to talk about taxes, but this is how we get things done in New York. So I'm going to hand it off to Erica. Erica, you probably, if you need to screen share, let me know. We'll get Tim to give you that, and we'll start off with our presentation.
Yeah, if you can give me screen sharing capabilities, awesome. Already done. Thank you all so much. So I am going to share my screen to do a little bit of what we call a teach-in. So if you have any questions and you put them in the chat, I apologize, I won't be able to see them, but rest assured, I am leaving time at the end to answer all of your questions. So let me get started here. Of course. Okay, so Invest in Our New York, we call it IONI for short. And this is not the first rendition of Invest in Our New York. We are over 3 years old, and we started essentially as a volunteer group of folks who helped defeat what we know as the Independent Democratic Conference here in New York, and really wanted to start passing a lot of good progressive legislation. But unfortunately, a lot of that legislation required funding, and the state just was pretending that it didn't have it. And so we started teaming up with a lot of the advocacy organizations that work hard on behalf of working class, low income, and needy New Yorkers, like Alliance for Quality Education, Vocal, New York Renews, Housing Justice for All, and realized that we were all being pitted against each other by the government, saying, well, we only have a certain amount of money, so we can only fund a certain amount of things. You all decide what is going to be funded. And we realized that, no, there is a lot of money here in New York State. And so we started fighting for our state to invest in our New York. We started off calling ourselves Budget Justice, and now we are officially Invest in Our New York, and we are over 100 organizations that have come together to endorse this platform that will raise $40 billion in new progressive funding that we can then invest directly into our communities and the programs and services that New Yorkers rely on every day. So we talk a lot about New York being number one, right? New York likes to be like the standout. People say if New York goes, so goes the country, and blah, 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 and all this stuff. Well, here's the thing. New York is also number one in inequality in the nation. And this is clearly not where we want to be in terms of number one. The average income of the top 1% of earners in New York is over 44 times the average income of the bottom 99%. So when we say that we genuinely have a 1% versus 99% problem here in New York, we are not kidding. And the ultra rich are continuing to get richer and richer. They have collectively owned $6.7 trillion of wealth, and they are only just 0.4% of New York State's population. To also put that into more updated context, corporations here in New York generated more than $220 billion at the height of the pandemic. That's $220 billion in profit. And meanwhile, workers are being laid off, folks cannot make their rent payments, and they are cold because the utility costs are so high and continue to skyrocket. So here again, we are seeing how people, working class, middle class, low income New Yorkers are struggling. 50,000 families faced eviction just in the first half of 2022. We know that here in New York City, where I'm located, there's at least 100,000 students almost every year who go from a homeless shelter to school, and that number just keeps climbing. We have a stagnant minimum wage, $15 minimum wage. Right now, you would basically need 4 minimum wage jobs in order just to pay rent here in New York City. And so people are struggling day to day while the rich just keep getting richer. And these New Yorkers, all, 19 million of us, are looking for answers, and we're looking to our state legislators and governor to give us those answers and to help us make ends meet. 2/3 of New Yorkers believe that the cost of living should be Governor Hochul's top priority. And 74% of New Yorkers agree that government needs to do more to solve problems like addressing the cost of living and making it more affordable to live here. And not only that, but 75% of New Yorkers favor taxing the ultra rich. So this way we can actually fund the services that are being provided. This percentage, this poll, by the way, is actually an older one. There's a new one that shows that 84% of New Yorkers believe we should impose a wealth tax on billionaires. So this way we can fund things like making sure our public infrastructure is actually standing and safe, and that we can build and keep people in truly affordable housing, and making sure every child has access to affordable childcare, and that the workers who provide that childcare are paid more than a minimum wage. And the truth is, we know that it doesn't have to be this way. And this is a policy choice, right? Because policy choices have been made for as long as there have just been elected officials. And we can see here, so this is, I know some of you who have seen this before and have seen me give this teaching before and know that this slide and the next slide are like my 2 favorite slides. We've talked about this a lot, but I think it really shows that it hasn't always been this way. So what you're seeing in this graph is how the percentage of income claimed by the top 1% declined from the 19 teens to about the mid 70s. And this did a whole lot to really reverse the extreme inequality that we saw increase during the Gilded Age. And this really was after World War II. Circumstances for Americans, right? This is a national, and federal chart, showed that life improved for everyone. And so how did this happen? Well, there was a stronger minimum wage provisions and antitrust regulations. Tax rate hikes were, imposed on the top. So like in the 1950s, Eisenhower administration had the wealthiest individuals paying, I think it was like 91% on income over what would be about $1.7 million today. And government invested in communities, in real people. They passed wage agreements, they passed Medicare, Social Security, unemployment insurance, federal agriculture subsidies, right? All of this, if it stayed this way, if we actually stayed on this path, the Economic Policy Institute estimated that poverty would have dropped to 0 by the year 2000. Y'all, if we made the right policy decisions, we could have eradicated poverty. But what happened? Well, corporations, their wealthy CEOs and rich Americans used their power and their influence to win tax cuts and deregulations under what we know now as trickle-down economics. And so this slide, this part of the graph shows what happened when all of these deregulations and tax cuts happened. The top 1%, the percentage of their income, rose again as the government continued to pass things. And they repealed controls like the Glass-Steagall Act. They started to union bust. And what we also have to, recognize is that, during the civil rights movement, when white Americans started to realize that a lot of the safety net services that the government was providing was going to be provided to Black Americans, Americans of color, they started to make it harder. They started to divest from these programs so that less and less people could actually access them. So when we talk about economic justice, right, this is also a racial justice issue, and we always need to recognize that and make sure we center that as we do this work. This is a policy choice. The people who are in positions of power have decided to divest from our communities, to divest from middle and working and low income New Yorkers. But we know that it doesn't have to be this way. And so I just want you to take like a second, and I will open up the chat so I can see it as well. But imagine a world, right? Let's say you walk out of your front door tomorrow where, and everything is fully funded. It is a world where everybody can prosper. What would you see? What would you see right outside your front door? And, to give you an example for me, I know that I would see a bus stop on the corner right across the street with a dedicated bus lane and an energy efficient electric bus that can, that is accessible to folks who are disabled, and the streets are clear of cars because we are investing in climate mitigation. What else could drop in the chat? What would you see? Would you see a parent or guardian bringing a child to daycare before they go to work? Free electric vehicle charging stations, no homeless people, right? Because everyone would have safe permanent housing ting. Yeah, those are the things, right? We can have those. That is not an unattainable vision, and the New York State budget is the key to this vision. So look, budget stuff really wonky. I'm going to give you like a little bit of some, historical, political, background. But basically, our fiscal year here in New York starts on April 1st. That is why in January, we start this whole budget dance. And the month of March is, excuse my language, but a complete shit show of just negotiations, late into the night of negotiating hundreds of billions of dollars in a state budget. But because of decades of disinvestment and regressive tax codes, a lot of the investments have just not been there. And so many of the programs are really underfunded. This includes things, right? So public education was significantly underfunded from the state level for decades. We know that our safety net hospitals are significantly underfunded. Public transportation, I know here in New York City, right? Our subway system, I know, even just like public roads. Think about what was happening in Buffalo during the earlier snowstorm where people were trapped. These are things that are going into disrepair because our government is not funding them. And so when we officially kicked off from budget justice to become Invest in Our New York in 2021, we really harnessed those needs and made sure that our elected officials heard us loud and clear and were able to secure some moderate increases on taxes, on personal income tax and corporate tax. And that was projected to bring in about $4.3 billion in new revenue. And that turned out to be about more like $10 billion in new revenue. And so we were able to fund things like fully funding our public schools on the state level, fully funding the emergency rental assistance program for a year, providing access to unemployment insurance during the height of the pandemic for undocumented New Yorkers and freelancers and independent contractors. But we know that those needs continue to grow. So even though we have about $10 billion in surplus, it is still not enough to meet the real needs that New Yorkers are facing every single day. And so that is why, again, we are here this year fighting for more investments in our communities. And these are things like education and childcare, housing, climate mitigation, and also our workers raising their wages and making sure that people are safe in their workplace. So just to give you like a brief background on some of like these broader funding areas that we're looking at. So in childcare and education, we want to make sure that we continue to invest in our K through 12 public schools. This is what we call foundation aid on the state level. We are finally at full foundation aid funding, and we need to make sure that our government is held accountable and continues to do that year after year. But we also want to make sure that higher education can be accessible to every New Yorker. And that's why we're fighting for free City University of New York and State University of New York, CUNY and SUNY, as opposed to what the governor is proposing, which she wants to increase tuition for students, which is essentially a regressive tax on New Yorkers. And we're also looking to invest in childcare. Look, the governor claims that she's, creating universal childcare here in New York, and that is just not true. There are children of undocumented families who don't have access to childcare. And just because you make it easier in terms of paperwork and applications doesn't mean that a childcare provider exists in your neighborhood and in your community. And so in order to do that, we need to make sure that we are paying childcare providers what they deserve. Right now, childcare providers in New York are paid less than 90% of the workforce across New York. They are competing with Target and McDonald's for workers. And so that means that there are childcare deserts throughout our state. And so the paperwork might be easier to fill out for your child, but if there is no door open to a provider, then that's not universal childcare. Housing. We know the governor is talking about wanting to build 800,000 units of new housing across New York State in the next 10 years. But as you saw before, there are over 100,000 New York City children who go from school to a homeless shelter. They can't wait 10 years. There are 90,000 folks who are also homeless across New York State. They can't wait 10 years for housing that will not be truly affordable because the governor wants to build that housing by giving tax breaks to real estate developers who lined her campaign coffers. What we want to do instead is make sure that we are funding programs like the Housing Access Voucher Program. And this would essentially help folks who are either experiencing homelessness or on the verge of being evicted to be able to pay their rent. Think of it as Section 8, but on the state level. We also want to make sure that we are improving housing conditions and building new social housing. NYCHA used to be the envy of the country, if not the world, and folks are living in mold and infestations, and it is so detrimental to their health. We need to make sure that we are fixing and retrofitting those apartments and building more social housing that doesn't rely on an unstable housing market that can skyrocket and force people out of their homes any day. And climate. I mean, in 2019, New York State passed the nation's leading Climate Leadership Protection Act. And this was, again, supposed to be like, so goes New York, so now the whole country is going to go. Well, guess what? We didn't put a single dollar behind that legislation. It is absolutely embarrassing. And so we are calling for $10.5 billion into climate mitigation. And part of that will go towards things like public renewables, making sure that New York is finally transitioning to just renewable 100% clean energy, making all of our buildings electric, getting gas out of our buildings, especially in new infrastructure. We can finally do this, and we know that we have the money to. And then finally, looking to make sure we're protecting workers. We're looking for $500 million for what's called the Unemployment Bridge Program. And this is essentially making permanent unemployment insurance for those who have been excluded in the past, undocumented New Yorkers, independent contractors, freelancers, and formerly incarcerated folks as well. We also want to make sure that we are expanding healthcare so that everybody has access to our public health exchange. Right now, undocumented New Yorkers don't have access to it. And we also need to fix the MTA. So we are huge proponents of the Fix the MTA plan, which would make sure that our public infrastructure here in New York City and the regional suburbs around the area have more access to better trains, as well as buses. And we also want to increase the minimum wage. We are huge fans of the Raise Up New York coalition, and we are looking to increase the minimum wage to $21.50 and then indexing it to inflation. Whereas the governor wants to start indexing it to inflation, basically starting at $15 an hour, and also cap that. So it is either 3% or inflation, whichever is lower. Just so you know, inflation last year was 6%. So if you got a 3% raise, there is no way you're still going to make ends meet. So how do we do this, right? I talked about what we need to invest in, but I also talked a little bit about making sure that we are raising these public dollars. And there are a number of ways that we can do this. And part of that is raising taxes on the wealthiest individuals and corporations. And we have 5 bills that would do this in a number of ways. And I won't go into like all of the wonkiness. We'll save that for questions for y'all. But just to give you a brief rundown, one of the things that we want to do is amend our personal income tax structure a bit more here in New York to make sure that the top 5% of income earners would be paying a little bit more. Right now, it's pretty flat. And so we want to increase the tax brackets on the wealthiest New Yorkers. We also want to tax what we call capital gains. So this is essentially income that folks make just by trading stocks and selling stocks and similar instruments and things like that. So this is passive income. They're not working their ass off for this the way you and I do when we go to work, but they are paying a lower tax rate on the federal level. The federal government favors capital gains income more than the hard-earned dollars that we make on a daily basis and we see in our paycheck. And so New York wants to create a surcharge of sorts to make sure that people are paying their fair share of capital gains in income. We also want to change up our corporate income, our corporate tax structure a little bit. So it is due to sunset at the end of this year. We want to make it permanent, but we also want to make sure that we are capturing every wealthy corporation that is doing business here in New York. And I want to make that clear. Not talking about like just businesses that are incorporated here so that like if they pick up and leave, we can't tax them anymore. We're talking about businesses that do business in New York. And guess what? Every business wants to do and does business in New York. They cannot hide from us. So essentially, we would be looking to raise our brackets. So this way that corporations that make over $2.5 million in profit annually will pay 8% in taxes. And if they make then $10 million in profits, that would be 12%. And if it's $20 million, then that would be 14%. And that also continues to keep us at a lower rate than other states like New Jersey. The other bills is an heirs tax. I'm going to be honest, this is probably the one that I struggle with the most, but essentially we have a really broken inheritance tax system here in New York that treats inheritances just like ordinary income. So here in New York State, you can inherit about like $5 million and not pay like a single dollar in taxes on that. And so we want to make some adjustments while also recognizing that there are some folks who might inherit things like small farms, right, in rural New York, and also houses as well, that someone that passed might just pass on to them. And so there are significant exceptions to this to make sure that those we are not trying to target are not accidentally targeted. And then finally, mark to market. So what does this mean? And I'm going to give you this is one of the easiest examples to give. If you own a home, you pay property taxes. And every year your property is reassessed, right? The value of your property is reassessed. And most often it goes up. So when the value of your property goes up, so do your property taxes. Well, people who can buy things like amazing pieces of art, if you will, let's say like an original Van Gogh, that will increase in value as well, but they don't pay any property taxes on that until they sell it. So if you don't sell your home, why are your property taxes going up? And you have to pay that even though you haven't realized that income, those profits, whereas the ultra rich don't have to do that on things like their boats or their private, jets, or their really expensive pieces of art. So essentially, we want to create a property tax on every type of property you could think of. And what else do we want to do? Well, here in New York State, we love to give corporations some significant tax breaks to the tune of about $10 billion a year. And we think it is long past time for that to end. So I think one of the things you hear about the most is called the 421A program, which is specific to New York City. But this is basically a property tax break that was given to real estate developers so that they would create affordable housing. We basically have foregone over $1 billion in tax revenue here in New York State as a result. And what studies and too many lawsuits have shown is that a lot of these real estate developers never actually created affordable housing. So they benefited from these types of tax breaks without actually giving back to the communities that they promised to support. And so we want to get rid of those archaic, wasteful corporate giveaways. All right, so how do we do this? Well, it is March 2nd, y'all, and I'm not going to lie, our budget is going to be late. The governor did not provide her budget proposal until February 1st, which was in her right because it was after an election, a November election. So the Constitution said that she was allowed to wait till February 1st, but things are moving kind of slow. Right now, what we are doing is putting pressure on our state legislature, the Senate and the Assembly, for them to have the Invest in Our New York Act in their one house budget proposal. So this is basically them putting together a document that says they support X, Y, and Z, but they reject A, B, and C in the governor's budget. And here are some things that they're proposing as well. We want to make sure that our legislators, our senators and assembly members are going to stand with working class New Yorkers in the way that Governor Hochul just absolutely refuses to. Governor Hochul's budget is significantly driven towards benefiting billionaires, millionaires, and her donors. So just to give you an example, there's a hedge fund guy by the name of Dan Loeb, who was given over $100,000 to Governor Cuomo and also put in more than $200,000 into a PAC for her while she was running. And Dan Loeb loves charter schools. He has funded charter schools like Success Academy. And guess what? Now Governor Hochul wants to raise the cap of charter schools. So she is looking to benefit her billionaire donors in the budget, not folks like you and me, not like our neighbors who are struggling to make ends meet. This is where our legislators come in. They stood with us in 2021 against He Who Shall Not Be Named when he was governor and actually passed modest tax increases. They can do that again, and they can do it in a way that makes sure that it is directed right back into our communities. At $40 billion in new annual revenue. We're not talking about like one shots here, right? Like the federal government, the stimulus funding, that's just pots of money that are going to run out. We're talking about annual money here that will help New Yorkers stay safe and healthy and continue to thrive. And that is why it is so important for us to make sure that we are putting what I like to call positive pressure on our elected officials. So how do we do that? Well, first we got to talk to each other, right? So the fact that you have me here giving you this teaching is one way for you to understand what we're fighting for and why we're fighting for it. And then I will get to provide you with ways that you can start talking to your neighbors about this information and get them engaged and enraged, right? And then from there, we start talking to our elected officials. You call your state senator, you call your assembly member, you ask them to support the Invest in Our New York Act. And we've got a whole slew of resources that can help you do that, from how to do a lobby meeting, and also phone scripts and email scripts and tweet scripts. And so I will make sure you will all get that information, I promise you. And so we have until about the middle of March to put all of this pressure on our legislators before they put their proposals out. And so we really need you in these next 2 weeks. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're going to need you after that too. But these next 2 weeks are going to be so crucial, because we want the governor to see that our legislators are hearing us loud and clear, and they're going to stand with us. And she's going to have a hard time pushing back against them during the negotiations. I am actually just going to stop there, because that was a lot. And I appreciate you all listening, but I wanted to make sure we have time for questions. And again, I will make sure that I put all of the information in the chat. And then I'll have Joe or whoever sends out the emails to make sure that they do that after the fact.
Great, thanks, Erica. It's a lot of information, I know, but it's important information. And there's a few questions in the chat, but we're going to ask everybody to, if you have a question, please put it in the chat, and then we can call on you and you can ask it, or we'll ask it for you if you want. So if you want to do that now, we would appreciate that. And I just wanted to highlight something that Erica had mentioned. This is not a new concept, and it's not something we've never done before, right? We raised, how much is it up to now? We raised again from
about $10.4 billion.
Right. And that was from, a reform in the income tax. That was, none of us felt it. It was for the ultra wealthy, to go towards that. But, and I think initially we thought it would only bring about 3 to 4 billion.
That's right.
It's triple almost. So, and that, and that's money that keeps coming here. These other reforms are going to be, they're going to think about this. I was at Stony Brook University the other day for something, and I was telling Erica about this. And these students are fighting. They know about Hochul's proposal to raise their tuition, right? But they could have no tuition. It could be free for SUNY and CUNY. I would love to have had free tuition when I went to Stony Brook, right? So that's one of those things we could be achieving. So I really want to ask you if you could put any questions in there. There's a question from before to give a brief overview about how the New York State budget is passed.
Yeah. So just so I could probably spend 2 hours on that as well. I've done teaching on just the budget process, but I swear I won't do that. So just the quick and dirty. Usually in about mid-January, the governor puts out their budget proposal. And this includes a whole presentation, but then a whole bunch of budget legislation, right? So it's the typical type of legislation that you normally see come from our legislature, but it is thousands upon thousands of pages. And essentially here in New York State, the governor has an outsized role in determining what the budget is for the state. So the legislature in essence, or, based on the Constitution, must pass the governor's budget. The governor must agree to things. And it's always a political negotiation, but there is no such thing as like a joint budget. It is literally the governor's budget. So they put out their proposal. The legislature will have joint legislative public hearings on different pieces of that. We are still in the middle of that, but wrapping it up, I think, like in the next 4 days. Some of these go for an hour, some of them go for 6 hours, where legislators get to question everybody from commissioners of agencies to experts and advocates to hear what is missing, why are things missing, what needs to be done that is good, that is bad, what needs to be done that's different. They're going to collect all of this information and then put together what they call their one house budget resolutions. And as I mentioned in my teach-in, this is normally done. We should have probably started to see these come out next week. We will not be seeing them come out next week. It's probably going to be closer to like mid-March. And as I said, these are just their responses to the governor, right? We have to pass the governor's budget. And so this is basically them saying publicly to the governor, here is where we're starting on negotiations. Once those are out, they'll pass them, they'll vote on them as resolutions. It's not legislation, so it doesn't enact anything. And then the budget marathon begins. This is basically during the day that leadership will be meeting. This is where the term 3 men in a room comes from, even though now it's 2 women and a man. But the governor and the leader of the Senate and the Speaker of the Assembly will go behind closed doors and hammer out some broad details and do some political negotiations. The finance chairs of each house and the governor's director of budget will also do the same thing. And then in the middle of the night, they'll go to their staff and say, here are your marching orders, flesh out those details. And as someone who has personally done this, now it's about 10 years ago, which is crazy to think, we sit in rooms between midnight and 5 a.m. and negotiate the details of budgets. And things are literally then being printed and ran to the Senate and the Assembly floor in hopes of passing a budget on time on April 1st. It probably won't be, but it is basically closed door rush negotiations, and a lot of politics is involved. I wish I had a better answer for you in how the budget is negotiated, but it really kind of sucks.
So I just want to put a follow-up point to that. There's 3 people in the room, right? But there's millions of New Yorkers. Okay. Don't forget we have collective power, right? And that's what the campaign's about, coming together. There's over 100 partners in the coalition, right? That's pushing for this. So we need you and your members in your different chapters, different organizations to really push this. This is a time crunch, right? They do this in like 2-3 days, or they're doing that last negotiation, but we have a month, right? We have a month to put pressure on them, and we can. And Ting is going to put some actions in the chat, so keep an eye out for that, and we'll have a follow-up about those actions. But we can be tabling, we can be calling, we could be marching on Albany and demanding that they do this.
Yeah, Joe, that's 100% right. And, I see a question in the chat of like, what can we learn from our attempts to do this in the past? And we can learn that exactly what Joe is saying, that people power can really make things move. In 2021, we made over 1 million calls to elected officials because of the number of people who were just making phone calls. We sent over 20,000 handwritten postcards and letters to our neighbors, urging them to call their elected officials as well. We held over a dozen press conferences. We had a huge march in Central Park. When we show up in numbers, when we come together with the people power, they cannot ignore us. When we put pressure on our legislators, they have to go to leadership, right? Those 3 people in the room and say, my phones won't stop ringing. I cannot check my email because I can't click on one before another one comes in telling me that we need to do this, that we need to invest in our New York. You gotta do something, because those elected officials are accountable to us. We can vote them out. And I'm not saying it's easy, but we've done it before. Again, don't forget the no IDC fight, where we finally flipped the state Senate to be true blue, right? Real progressive Democrats, not fake Democrats who are actually Republicans. So if we put that pressure, if we work together, we can actually move the needle. Again, it's not easy, but we've done it before. And so we know we can do it again. And we have to do it here on the state level. What is so great right now, and what is really starting to rally a whole bunch of people, is the fact that President Joe Biden, the top Democrat in the country, a moderate Democrat, called for taxing the rich in his State of the Union. That is huge. And some people might say like, oh, well, he can't really do anything. It's just like a signal. But you know what? We're going to take that signal and we're going to run with it. Because you're right, we can't do it in Congress, right? We have a GOP Congress. There's no way it's going to happen. That's why we're going to do it here in New York. We're not going to wait for the federal government to come and save us. We've never waited for the federal government to come and save us. Us New Yorkers knew they were never coming to save us during the pandemic. That's why we fought for those investments and those tax increases in 2021. So we're going to do it again, but we need all hands on deck.
Now, there's another question further up in the chat from Mary, I believe. She wanted to know conservative pushback. It's not always a conservative pushback on basically millionaires flying away, and leaving us, or people, just you say people running away from this. So what's the counter argument to that?
Oh, the counter argument is the fact that that is just not true, and it is a fear-mongering tactic. I am going to drop a very recent article in the chat that basically synthesizes a whole bunch of new state data that is out there about millionaire migration. And I'll get a little wonky for a couple of minutes just to flesh some of this out for you. Look, some rich people, they did leave during the pandemic, right? In 2020, we did see like a significant, group of rich people leave because they could actually afford it. Now, many of them just left New York City and went to the Catskills or the Hamptons to their second homes. And so they stayed here. But those who left are also coming back. And not only are they coming back, but more millionaires are moving into New York, and more millionaires or more people are becoming millionaires, to the point that from 2020 to 2021, the number of millionaires in New York State increased by 21%. So you'll see some headlines, right? Like there's another New York Times article that basically does the same thing, analyzes the same data that this Gothamist article does. But the headline says 1,400 millionaires move out of New York. They don't talk about the fact that we increased the number of millionaires by almost 15,000 people from 2020 to 2021. They are not leaving. Well, we also know, and there's a report that's not out just yet, and I'll see if I can pull it up, just because they're starting to pull some more things and make it public. But people don't move because of taxes. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into this. We know people move because they want to be closer to family. We know people move because they want to find a bigger home that they can afford to raise their family. There was just a New York Times article that showed that we lost 200,000 Black families in New York because they could no longer afford to raise their families here. We know people leave because there's a better job waiting for them in another state. But nobody looks at New York and says, they're going to tax me a significant amount, I'm moving to Florida. In fact, the people who are leaving, the millionaires who did leave, the number one state that they moved to was New Jersey. So they're still chilling in the tri-state area. They're not going to Texas and Florida. They're going to New Jersey. So I'm telling you that they are not leaving. And we are going to be putting out like a one-pager to help everybody to make sure that you can combat that. But if anyone tells you they are leaving, the real cohort of people who are leaving are working class and middle New Yorkers who no longer can afford to live in this state.
Right. So another question, this one's from Jean. We won't get everything we want, so what happens after the budget is passed? And
okay,
there's a point though to make, just to add before you go to that, Erica, just to say, like, that happened in 2021. And what did we get? And so we got 10 billion, right? So we're keep pushing it, but I want Erica to address that question.
Yeah, so just so you know, I just dropped something else in the chat that talks about why people actually move from state to state and how it is not taxes. And this is one of like my favorite studies that is starting to be like really teased out. So I urge you all to read that when you get a chance. Look, we are never going to get everything we want, right? There's a reason why the nonprofit and advocacy world is so big, because we do just have to keep fighting. But every year when we keep fighting, we do keep securing wins. And so what we don't win this year, we fight for again next year. We adjust and move forward. And that's, you know, that's how this world works. Unfortunately, we're never going to get everything we want in one try, but we know that this is going to be more than just a year-long battle. This is a years-long battle, right? Joe and I have been part of budget justice since like what, 2019? And so this is work, you know, that continues to grow because we continue to educate each other and bring more people into it. And so every year we can win more and more. To get a little more technical with this, very rarely is spending, so investing in a program, done outside of the budget process. But it is possible to raise revenue outside of the budget process. And so we are fighting tooth and nail to make sure that we get the Invest in Our New York Act into the budget, but you can be damn sure we'll fight outside of the budget if we have to.
And just remember, there's a cost for inaction, right? The cost is Hochul passes a budget for billionaires. We'll see cuts to different services. I already know SUNY and CUNY are going to get an increase to their tuition. Student debt's going to go up. So it's a divestment, a defund of the middle and the working class by this, because when they cut services and they cut and they increase fees and taxes locally, they're just taking from us and they're giving to the billionaires. So no class warfare for you. Okay. So if we don't take action, you leave tonight and you don't take action, there's a cost to that. There is a cost to inaction. All right. That's a little guilt trip for you. All right. So Ting has put several links into the chat on what actions you can take. We're going to email you those actions as well. I will give you Andrea Stewart Cousins' phone right here, right now, and I'll ask you to call her and ask her to, you know, pass, you know, these various bills. So you can do this tomorrow, but her number is 518-455-2585. Leave a voicemail, do whatever you can. Tell her you want to see the Invest in New York package passed into the budget. Fight for us, do what's right. Okay, that's a very simple call. It'll take you a minute to do it. You know, like Erica said, we got to flood their email, we got to flood their phone. We've got to do something. And the only way, you know, the only way I know to do something is either go out into the streets and scream and yell, or, you know, get into their offices and pester them till they do something, right? So do that too. Get your local representative. I think, as so Mark said, he's got only Republicans. I don't care. Call them. Call them.
Republicans want to tax the rich too.
Yeah.
Check out the article that I just dropped underneath Mark's comment. 3 out of 4 Republicans think we should be taxing billionaires here in New York State. This is not a progressive radical left belief here. This is a New Yorker belief. This is a New Yorker value.
Exactly. This is what unifies us, right? We know the billionaires, and I mean, Hochul gave, how much did he give away to the owner of the Buffalo Bills? All right.
Almost $1 billion.
Right. And how much is she investing in education? Can't really say. So, so can I get a confirmation? Raise hands that you're going to take an action. You can do that however you need to. Come on video and raise your hand, or, you know, give us the little emoji. Good. I'm seeing some hands. I'm not seeing the whole screen full of hands, but I'll leave that to your phone. Great. I will follow up.
We're also going to have a ton of fun events coming up too. If you love to, Joe mentioned sometimes like just run into the streets and scream. If you want a chance to be able to like yell about this and yell in solidarity with a lot of us activists, we're going to be having both New York City and regional events coming up in March. So just make sure that you stay in touch. I know NYPAN has been really amazing at continuing to make sure that everybody has the information of what we are doing here at Ione.
Right. And reach out to us if you want to take action, or you want to do, you want other things to do around this that we haven't listed. You have ideas, reach out to us. We're open to hear, and really get this going. Some of those links are for tabling actions this weekend. Check that out in Brooklyn and in New York City. I think there's one in Midtown, and there's one in Upper East Side, I think, right? So there's Gene, you're in the Bronx. Maybe the Bronx chapter can do a tabling. That would be awesome. Take some action out into the street. There's a letter that you can have people sign, and we'll collect them and we'll deliver them. It'll be a great sight to see Andrea Stewart Cousins and Carl Heastie get a couple of, I'd love to see a few million, but we'll keep it realistic, a couple of thousand letters. So, and we got to do this. It's now March 2nd, and yeah, they probably vote on this in about a month because it's going to be late, right? So let's get it done. Let's keep at it. I don't see any other way that we can move forward without doing this. We can't keep letting the ultra wealthy, get away with not paying their fair share. We've done it for so long. It's now their turn to contribute with us. So, any other questions before we close out? Otherwise, I don't see any in the chat. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. NYPAN appreciates your support. If you want to become a supporting member of NYPAN, we'll also be sending out a link that you can become a supporting member. We do a lot of these events that we have do need some financial support, just like we need public funds for public good. We hope that you find NYPAN is a public good, and that we are helping to inform and educate and get you out there and active. And I want to thank Erica for coming in tonight. She's very busy with this. It's busy time, and we really appreciate her time. And thank you everybody for showing up, and take these actions. All right.
Let's do it.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.